I learned fluent Mexican Spanish in high school. Here's how. I was spending 45 minutes a day in my classes 5 days a week. Now, many of us might feel frustrated because we think, gosh, I'm just not learning Spanish as fast as I would like. But I'd like to ask you, how much time are you truly spending learning the language? Now, it was never really my intention to learn a more Mexican Spanish. And something I'd like for you to know is that Spanish is still Spanish. Of course, throughout different Spanish-speaking countries, you have different slang, different accents, different dialects. But at the end of the day, Spanish is still Spanish. If I were to go to the Dominican Republic, I'd still be able to have conversations in Spanish with people. It might be hard for me to understand them and maybe harder for them to understand me, but the reality is we'll still be able to have conversations in Spanish because at the end of the day, Spanish is still Spanish. So my first real encounter with Mexican Spanish after I had started taking classes was with my friend Luis. So my friend Luis is a native Mexican Spanish speaker from the state of Aguascalientes, Mexico. So I vividly remember I had my first Spanish class ever and I learned the basic things, buenos dias, buenas tardes, buenas noches, all these things. And so I said, okay, this is interesting. I've never really considered that I can make weird sounds and a whole new person is going to be able to understand me, but I thought it was cool. So I said, okay, I'm going to go out of my class and I'm going to practice with Luis. And I said to Luis, I just had my first Spanish class and I'm curious if you can understand me. Does this make sense? And I said to him in my terrible accent, buenos dias. He's like, yeah, that's great. That means good morning. And from there, this is when I got the bug. I was like, oh my gosh, that was cool. That was weird. Why has no one ever told me about this before? A really important lesson to learn from my story is that I failed a lot. Every day I was failing and embarrassing the heck out of myself. But I think an important lesson that we can learn from my story is that I was fearless. And I think maybe this just has something to do with my personality, that ultimately I don't really care what anyone thinks or if they're going to laugh at my Spanish. I just want to get better. So therefore, I'm going to go out, I'm going to try and speak with people, and I'm going to make mistakes. Because something we need to remember is that at the end of the day, the reason we learn Spanish is to have conversations with people. If you want to get better, you have to fail a lot. And when you fail a lot, you're ultimately putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, which is just part of it. Now, at first, this is kind of hard to maybe get over, but the more and more you're speaking and kind of getting out of your comfort zone, the more and more you're going to improve and the more and more comfortable you're going to feel. Now, it took me about 1 year to become fluent. And I'm going to use that term very loosely because fluency can take on many different definitions depending on who you ask. Ultimately, for me, fluency is being able to have conversations with people about most things. How was your day? The weather? Ordering food. Now, even though I was able to have conversations with people about pretty much anything I wanted about a year into my learning journey, my accent still wasn't good. I still occasionally couldn't understand people. And it's not like my Spanish was perfect, so please don't think that, oh wow, this guy learned perfect fluent Spanish in a year. Not the case. Where I'm from, we have a lot of native Spanish speakers who come from Mexico. So therefore, I was constantly hearing music in Spanish, hearing, words and phrases that come from Mexico, and just the general accent. This is when I really started listening to music in Spanish, more so Mexican Spanish, every single day. And this is when my accent really started to take a shift. And it's crazy because a lot of the people who I was speaking Spanish with at the time would say, wow, your accent really does sound like you're from Mexico, and it almost sounds like you're from the north of Mexico. Now, I'd like to think that people are just being nice because I look at YouTube videos that I filmed 3-4 years ago and I say, wow, my Spanish accent was way worse than it is now. But I still had that general accent going on. As I had mentioned earlier, I was pretty fearless when it came to learning Spanish. And this ties into asking a lot of questions. So I think it's very important for us to remember. So you have to get rid of the ego and ask a lot of questions. Now, if you don't have a teacher, I highly recommend you go online and find a Spanish teacher. You can also, shameless self-promotion, check out my website, SpanishNate.com. We have an awesome community on there where I and your peers will help you and motivate you. So one of the jobs I had in high school was at a frozen yogurt shop. And I was the guy who chopped up the yogurt, mixed all your things, and handed you your yogurt. And we had a lot of clients come in who would speak Spanish, then I would hear them speaking, or they'd order, maybe they have an accent, and would say, hey, would you mind if I practice with you? Oh, yes, absolutely, of course, go ahead. And I would practice through that. Speaking with people, I would learn the sizes of the different yogurt cups, different topping names and things like that. I also worked at a Spanish restaurant, not a Mexican restaurant, but a Spanish restaurant, and I was a host. So once again, clients would come in, I'd speak Spanish to them. Also, a lot of our kitchen staff were Spanish speakers, so I would go in, and there was one guy who was kind of like a dishwasher, and I was filling up water and he said to me, "Échale gas, carnal." And I was like, what the heck does that mean? He's like, "Give it gas, bro, give it gas." So that was a great way for me to practice my Spanish as well. Another way that I was practicing was through volunteering. Volunteering, teaching adults conversational Spanish on the weekends was really, really incredible and really helpful for my Spanish, because I was essentially helping adults from all ages, just conversation. And they would ask me, "Nate, how do you say pepper?" And I wouldn't know. And I would say, Chile. And then maybe there was a native speaker who was kind of like overseeing it. Like, no. They're referring to this kind of pepper, which is pimiento or pimienta, that kind of thing. So I learned a lot. Once again, really important to just try and put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to make mistakes or embarrass yourself, but really just try to have conversations with people. That really will help you improve the fastest. Now, let me tell you that when it came to trying to learn a more Mexican Spanish and improve at my Mexican Spanish, going to Mexico for the first time at the end of 2018 was hugely important to me. I had been learning Spanish for 4 years, mind you. So it wasn't like I'd been learning Spanish for a little bit. I hadn't been learning Spanish for years at this point. So when I got to Mexico, I thought my Spanish is gonna be great. I'm gonna understand people just fine. People are gonna laugh. People are gonna think my Spanish is great, all this stuff. And wow, did I have a rude awakening. But there were a lot of things that I did not understand. I would say most of it's slang and just various accent differences that I was not used to. But that was a big kick in the butt because it motivated me. I said, wow, okay, I can still improve so much, because while I was able to have conversations with people about pretty much anything, when it came to throwing in a bunch of slang and new things that I wasn't used to, I was totally lost. And this is kind of when I started to dive deeper into learning new, more Mexican words and phrases like güey, qué onda, qué bárbaro, neta, all these different kinds of words. So after I'd gone to Mexico, I actually ended up going and living in Spain for 3 months. I lived in Sevilla, which is in the south of the country. Now, this is very important, and I want you to listen close. A lot of the people who came on this trip with me didn't have a super solid knowledge or understanding of the Spanish language before the trip. And they were thinking, oh, well, I'm just going to show up in Spain and I'm going to leave after 3 months, speak perfect Spanish, because that's just how it works. Wrong. That did not work at all. And I ended up being the teacher a lot of the times, because we would have native Spanish teachers and they would be saying, "Hola clase, blah, 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 blah." And these other students would get totally lost. Then I would have to go back and teach them in English so that they could learn how the language works and what was going on. The reason I want to include this in the story is because if you think to yourself that you need to go to a different country to learn the Spanish language, you are wrong. You don't. I learned 95% of all of my Spanish in the United States. Of course it helps. Of course it's extremely fun. I highly recommend you go and you travel to Spanish-speaking countries. But the reality is, you don't need to do that if you want to learn the language. Now, honestly, one of the biggest reasons that my Spanish got way better in the past 4 years is because I started making YouTube videos. So at the beginning of my YouTube journey, I was just filming these fun videos with my friends. We called it Nate's Adventures. And then that eventually changed into what you're watching now, which is Spanish with Nate. But when I started making videos of me speaking in Spanish to people and kind of surprising people, these kind of like titles of like, oh, guy speaks perfect Spanish. Because of those videos, I was speaking Spanish all the time. I was listening to the language all the time. I was improving my own accent, just speaking the language literally every single day for hours and hours. And the kind of big last thing of how I learned Spanish was moving to Mexico. So I moved to Mexico about a year ago. 95% of the Spanish that I learned was back home in the United States. Of course, living here in Mexico has helped me a lot. I think more so than that, it's having a Spanish-speaking girlfriend. That has helped me immensely, because then I can ask her all these weird things I'm hearing or phrases, or maybe she says things to me. I'm like, what the heck is that? Once again, you don't need to move or travel to a different country in order to learn the language. You can do it at home. And the biggest thing, like I said, is study the grammar, listen, and speak, speak, speak. You got to speak a lot. So just to wrap up, I want to talk about some lessons to be learned from my story. So number one is that you need to focus on your mindset. This is hugely important, because if you go into learning Spanish with the idea that Spanish is so hard to learn, or I'm too old to learn, or all of these kind of negative storylines that you probably have going on, you have to remind yourself, okay, I can learn the language. I'm going to go slow. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to enjoy the process, and I can do it. Because when you look at it in a very negative light, well, you're going to improve much slower. Like I had said, the most important thing is to speak every day. Speak, speak, speak. If you're frustrated with your progress in Spanish at the moment, you need to start speaking every day. And if you are speaking every day, speak more. Speaking is the key. Now, I'd also like to quickly talk about apps. Spanish learning apps are great. Two of my favorite ones are SpanishDictionary.com and Anki. They are absolutely awesome. The thing is, do not use too many apps. If you have 10 apps, you're going to majorly spread yourself thin, and you're not going to learn as fast. Get yourself a resource that is going to teach you the grammar, because you can sit down and study for 10 minutes. I promise you, you literally just take those 10 minutes and then put those things into practice in the real world by speaking. You're going to be amazed at how much faster you're going to improve. There's this Chinese proverb that I had read, and I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but essentially it's moving slowly is better than standing still. The biggest thing is you just want to be consistent. And this goes for anything. Anything that you want to get better at, you just have to be consistent. And finally, I'd just like to say, relax, enjoy yourself. Learning Spanish should be fun. It shouldn't be this super serious endeavor. It's not the end of the world if you learn slowly or if you get frustrated or if you make a fool of yourself. It's very, very normal. Take the pressure off yourself. Just relax, enjoy it, have fun, and thank you so much for watching. Muchas gracias. If you want to become conversationally fluent in Spanish as fast as possible, check out the Fluent Spanish Speaker Academy. Here's what some of our current members have to say. Caden, an NYU graduate, says, "You won't find a more committed teacher than Nate. His lessons provide students with a comprehensive set of vocabulary and skills to use long after you've completed the course. We stand behind our program with a 30-day full refund policy. If you're not happy within 30 days, we'll give you your money back, no questions asked." To find out if the Academy is right for you, click the link on the screen or in the description below.